My name is Betty Anderson. I teach Middle East history here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me to be the chair. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to start introducing the speakers so we can move forward. So our first speaker is Farouk El-Baz, who is a professor here at Boston University. He's the director of the Center for Remote Sensing. He participated in NASA's Apollo program as Secretary of Lunar Landing Site Selection and Chairman of Astronaut Training and Visual Observations and Photography. He directed the Smithsonian Institution's Center for Earth and Planetary Studies and received numerous honors, including NASA's Apollo Achievement Award and the Nevada Medal. He served as science advisor of President Anwar Sadat and obtained Egypt's Order of Merit First Class. He chaired the U.S. National Committee on Geological Sciences, is a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. On a more personal note, he and I were on a panel about a year and a half ago about Egypt. So I know that he has spent a good deal of time the last couple of years really going back to Egypt and really engaging with the issues that we're all talking about today. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Boston University. I think my talk will be very different from what you expect, because I will say the fact that all the revolutions in the Arab countries right now stem from the same source. I think whatever the case, whatever is happening, whatever is not happening, even in the Gulf, there are all kinds of things that have changed the Arab mentality. And for that, we have to recognize something very essential. And that essential thing is the fact that most of the Arabs in general, wherever they might be, in North Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, are dissatisfied with the status quo. And the status quo is the fact that here there are a whole bunch of countries that are divided and they are not really connected, and they should be connected. And I remember myself when I was a student here at in the U.S. in the 60s, yeah, early 60s. When I think of my generation, I think of a generation that had all kinds of hopes for the Arab world. I studied at Missouri School of Mines, and I came here to the MIT to do my special research, and we organized something that's called the Organization of Arab Students, and we wanted to establish something very significant as far as Arab unity is concerned. And I had an hour every week on the MIT radio. We produced the Arab Reporter, a magazine for all Arab students throughout the country. It was a movement that all of us, Arabs from all kinds of countries, from Kuwait all the way to Mauritania or Yemen, and we had great hopes for the Arab world. We really thought that we are just poised to greatness. We had the years of subjugation by the French and the English, the French and the English after the demise of the Ottoman Empire, and here we are, highly educated, and we're ready to go. And ready to go, we thought of 4 things that we thought that we will definitely be able to do. Why not? We're highly educated. We're just as good as anybody else anywhere, and we can do them all. The first one was Arab unity. The second was liberation of Palestine, or correcting the whole mess in Palestine. 3, eradication of illiteracy. And 4, creating social justice in the Arab world. And all of these 4 were things that we thought that we can do, and there is nothing that will stop us from it, and that we certainly are able to do it very easily. And why? Because we think that this is something that all the Arab youth agree to. And we were the Arab youth then, and we agreed to it, and we knew that all of our buddies and family members and members of the family from the villages and so on all agree to these basic things, that we can do them all. We speak the same language, we do this, and we can realize all of these things that we had in mind. So we began to think about it and doing it, and in all 4 aspects, we failed miserably. And that bothered me a lot personally, because I was very heavily involved in all of this Arabism and Arab unity and so on, and it never really dawned on me until way back, after this time, when I thought, why did we fail so miserably? And they realized that we failed miserably because we depended on institutions to do it all for us. And whoever depends on institutions to do it would forget the individual. What do you mean depended on institution? We thought, of course, we'll have Arab unity. Arab unity in what form? We said, well, we now the Arab League, which was created in Cairo, and all of the Arab heads of states will meet together in the Arab League meetings, and they will realize that if they stay individual countries like that, they will be useless, and there will be nothing will be trampled on. So they will make a federation, and they will select one of them every year to be the head of the Arab states, and this way we'll have Arab unity. And we've realized that now they have the Arab League, the heads of states meet during the Arab League, and they all, whatever the reason for it, they just embarrass us all. Whenever they meet, it's a disaster. We want to turn off the TV so no one else can see this. These are not the behavior of heads of states. Good God. So, and then we wanted to say that we will resolve the Palestinian problem. And resolve the Palestinian problem, they were dependent on the military institutions. Yes, at the time, Egypt had 350 soldiers. Iraq had 250 the soldiers of the army. The Syria had 200,000. We thought, my God, but the military establishment told us that the drive to Tel Aviv will take 2 days, 2-3 days. By the time the tanks make it to the unreal. The expectations were so enormous, and the military institutions, all of them, were lousy. They couldn't know how to stand in line. The guys that went from Egypt into Sinai didn't know where they were. So it was depending on the institution, and the institution failed. And now we thought that we'll eradicate illiteracy. By how? By the ministries of education. Now in every other country there is a ministry of education, and the ministry of education, and the minister of education himself doesn't really know what education is. And the teachers are not trained, and they don't give a damn about teaching people how to even read and write, but they are just there to do whatever the hell they do, and they create classes to make a little bit of extra money, and that's all. And the last one, social justice in the Arab world. And what we thought, of course, we can get the money from all of the very rich people, like the rich of Egypt, for instance, take all of the money from the rich and divide it among the poor. And all of these governments and the institutions, they took all the money from the rich and divided it among themselves. So it was a total disaster, total loss for years. And I thought about it. I was totally disillusioned, and I finally realized that this is the case, and we should really consider it, and we say it. So I wrote all of this down, and I wrote it under a title of Generation of Failure. That's one article. And the first line in it was, my generation has failed completely in satisfying any of the hopes of the Arab people, which I really still believe today. And I tried to publish it in Cairo. It was refused by Haram. I sent it to Sharq al-Awsat. They published it, and it's at the time, most of my buddies and friends called me up and say, what the hell are you saying? What is this that you're saying such and such? But the younger people today are beginning to search into the public domain and spread this word to others. And the final aspect of this whole thing is the fact that if my generation has failed completely in satisfying any of the hopes of the Arab people in general, then we should step aside. We should leave it to the younger generation. None of us are capable of really doing much at all in the Arab world today. My generation and the generation after us immediately, which we affected in a bad way. So all of these generations are really useless. They cannot lead. We cannot possibly find the resources to fix the things. The Arab youth are capable of doing it. And the Arab youth objected to and revolted against the status quo, and they are going to reach the goal. So now if we're thinking of what is it that is happening today, or what is the problems and here and there, and what's happening in Egypt and why Egyptians did not fix it, and we expected here because of what we saw at Tahrir Square, that things are going to be hunky-dory and so on. No way. You have revolutions, and revolutions take time to mature. There is no two ways about it. All revolutions worldwide, throughout history, revolutions were followed by a messy time. It varied between 10 years and maybe more. because revolution is like that. It's a structure that you turn down. I didn't do that, did I? No. Revolutions are something you get a structure and crush it, but you have to rebuild it. And rebuilding meaning one brick at a time. So it takes time. In addition to that, we thought the revolution is there to initiate democracy, and democracy is messy. There is no such thing as all of a sudden I will get established democracy and everything will be everybody will stand in line and do it right. No, democracy is a mess, and it is very messy to establish a system of democracy. So it takes time. So I'm not really concerned about it. The fact that the mess in Tunisia today, or Libya, or Egypt, or whatever, they are going to take their time. But I have complete confidence in the fact that the Arab youth in all of these countries is well focused. They know exactly what to do. Amr Hamzawi and younger people know exactly what is it that they want to do from this side and this side and this side. The people that are in control today in all of these countries have no idea what is happening on the street and no idea of what the youth can do. And they tell you, well, you give them, when I talk to my generation, say, what do you give them? Give them the opportunity to do what? They can't do anything. They have no experience. They can't do it. Fine. Let them learn. Let them make mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. But just take out of the way, because the continuation of the status quo is a very dangerous thing. And the control by the people that are in control of these Arab countries today, in whatever country it is all bad. And none of them can really open up the gates of vision, imagination, and the things that the Arab youth would like to see. But the Arab youth now today would like to see themselves empowered, feeling that we have something out of that this country is ours, not somebody runs it and we are just the little ants in the great. No, we are empowered. This is our country, and we feel it. And you can get that from the Arab youth that was during the revolution, because some of them would come around and be cleaning the streets and doing this, and somebody would ask him, why are you doing this? They were discovered that we love our country. And it was a discovery, because none of the generations before them had that kind of feeling. But these people really love their country, and they wanted to fix it, and they are willing to fix it, and they know they will make mistakes, and we should allow them to make mistakes, learn from their mistakes, and run with it. Right now, my generation and the one after me immediately is still in control. Is still running things. And what Amr says about the fact that things are not really changing as much and things are going back to such and such, because that generation is safer this way, the institution. And when you have your trust in the institution, you forget about the individual. You suffocate the individual. I give them examples of something that I actually know. I have a young kid that graduated from the engineering school. He goes to work in a factory, and he will see that they are doing this thing this way and this way and this way, and then he will think, my God, if we do it in a different way, it will be better, faster, cheaper, whatever it is. So he will go to his boss and tell him, sir, we're doing it, but if we can do it, the boss will look at them and say, we've been doing this for 20 years. You just graduated from college. You just go do your work. And if he repeats it again, I say, then go do your work. And he will no longer change or do something different or this and that, so they will suffocate them all. I gave them an example of a cookie factory. When we lived in Egypt in 1964, there was a factory of cookies near Sarai al-Ubba in Cairo, and I had no money and I had no job, and I was good after my PhD, and they would go buy some cookies for my wife and daughters. And because it was cheap to buy it from the office, from a little thing from the office. Way late, 20 years later, I was driving in a car. I've been driven by a car after I became science advisor to the president and all of that. And they would go there, and I thought the driver to stop to go back to see what happened to that factory. So I went, and a little bit of a shop right in the door of the factory. And I asked for the cookies. He gave me the box, which was identical to the one I used to buy in 20 years back. And I asked him, is there one that is covered by a green thing rather than the yellow? He said, no, this is it. Have they ever made round cookies or something that's covered with chocolate or something? No, that's one. So for 20 years, they are doing this. 20 years, they're producing the same damn thing, because that's an institution. They learned how to do it, and they are doing it, and there is nothing that you can change. The Egyptian youth are objecting to that, because if you're doing this and you're not doing anything, you're not going to find a new job for a new kid that has some new idea or something like that. And that's why I really say that we shouldn't now consider that what is happening in the Arab world today as something that's problematic or something that's going to stand in the way of democracy. This not at all. It is going to change the Arab youth, specifically in Egypt, but everywhere else. They have decided on the fact that they cannot live in these kinds of conditions. They have decided that they are capable of doing something different. That's why they revolted, and I think we should support them. We should give them time, and we should give them as much help and support as we possibly can. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Caryle Murphy, independent journalist and book author, a former reporter for the Washington Post who covered both domestic and international issues, and twice was a foreign correspondent, first in South Africa and later in Cairo. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting and the George Polk Award for Foreign Reporting for her coverage of Iraq's 1990-91 occupation of Kuwait from inside the emirate. In 2005, she spent 3 months in Baghdad covering the U.S. occupation of Iraq. After leaving the Post, Murphy spent 3 years in Saudi Arabia working as an independent freelance journalist. In 2011-12, she was a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. She's the author of Passion for Islam, which explains Islam's contemporary revival and the roots of religious extremism in the Middle East. Her second book, Of Kingdom's Future, Saudi Arabia Through the Eyes of Its 20-somethings, was published this year. Her talk is, What Do Saudi 20-somethings Want?
Good morning. I just am going to throw out there a thought, and I will leave it to the historians in the room to find the answer for me. I'm just wondering when the Arab world has last been in the turmoil that it is today. I'm thinking maybe the answer goes back centuries. But as you know, in the midst of all this turmoil, there's one oasis of apparent tranquility, and it's called Saudi Arabia. What's the reason for this? Well, there are two short answers. One is money. As you know, the rich are different from the rest of us, and the Saudi government has the wherewithal to run a welfare state that buys off dissent and maintains a complacent population in exchange for getting financial benefits. This population stays out of politics for the most part. The second reason is the Saudi government has a short fuse, and in the 2 years since the uprisings began in December 2010, the government has become increasingly intolerant of dissent and criticism, and it's arrested a lot of people. And maybe you heard about Abdullah al-Juhani, who came up to a group of journalists, including me, and started yelling about how Saudi Arabia was a police state in front of a phalanx of policemen. And to prove him correct, he was promptly arrested and detained for several months. But the lack of mayhem in Saudi Arabia also has a lot to do with Saudi culture and how Saudi young people see themselves and what they aspire to. So for the rest of my talk, I'll be giving you a profile of young Saudis. This is based on my living there for 3 years as a freelance journalist and doing scores of interviews with young Saudis, mainly in their early 20s, from my book. So let's start with the basics, which is demography. Saudi Arabia is passing through an unprecedented demographic period in its history. Those who are under 30 now comprise 64% of the population. By comparison, in the United States, those under 30 make up only 41% of the population. But what's more significant is that the kingdom's largest ever youth bulge has not yet come of age. And I'm talking about boys and girls who are this year between 13 and 17 years old. They make up 12% of Saudi Arabia's almost 20 million people. And those who are younger than them, they make up a slightly smaller percentage because of a drop in fertility in recent years. Now, economically, the government's biggest challenge will be providing jobs for these youths. In 2009, youth employment among those under 30 was 27% and significantly higher, almost 40%, for those aged 20 to 24. The Saudi Minister of Labor, Adil al-Faqih, has estimated that the government or Saudi Arabian economy has to create 6 million jobs by 2030, which is only like in 15, 16 years, to handle the surge of youths looking for employment. This is obviously one of the reasons why the government you've been reading about has been cracking down on the private sector hiring foreign nationals. Because, and this is an amazing figure, 90% of the people working in the private sector, not the government, were foreigners. And so the government's trying to bring that down and make a space for Saudis to get in those jobs. Okay, education. What did my interviewees say? A lot of them were very frustrated by the education they got. And their main complaint was that it's too theoretical with no practical application. Ennui and boredom is a big problem. Lack of motivation is a problem, more among boys than girls, because girls are all driven to prove themselves. There's very few opportunities for self-expression through extracurricular activities. There are no elected student councils in Saudi Arabia universities. And they're only, even the boys in public schools don't have a big sports program. It's very minimal. And obviously the girls, it's non-existent. Surprisingly, given the wide attention this issue has raised in the West, my interview subjects said were about evenly divided on whether they had gotten, and whether religion had gotten too much attention in their curriculum. About half said that not too much time was spent on religion. They were happy with the amount of time spent on religion in their classes. The other half did say that religion took up too much of their time. Now, while we're on the topic of education, I want to talk about what I call the wild card in Saudi Arabia. And that's about 145,000 young people who are now studying overseas on government scholarships. About half of them, like 70,000, were enrolled in the United States in the last school year. At the time of 9/11, there were around 4,000 Saudis studying in the United States. To go from 4,000 to 70,000 is an illustration of this program, which I think is an unprecedented social experiment in Saudi history. So everyone's going to be wondering what effect or what impact these young people will have once they come home. The internet. I can't say enough about how much this has influenced and is influencing young Saudis. Saudi Arabia has more than 50% of the active Arabic users of Twitter. And if you've done any reading about the internet in Saudi, you know that young Saudis are all over it. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and see satiric videos by Saudis of their society. And the last one, the last time I looked, had 10 million hits. And that was a young Saudi who had studied here in the States, and he loved the Bob Marley song, No Women, No Cry. And he went home and did a satiric version entitled No Women, No Drive. And 10 million hits. And that's just the start of it. They're satiric videos of social import all over YouTube. So what is the result of this internet influence? Well, first of all, the isolation of Saudi is gone. Forget, if I ever hear anyone call Saudi Arabia the isolated desert kingdom, I'll punch them out. It's also made Saudis more questioning, more curious, more able to compare their lives to others. Young people said to me it's also given them a measure of freedom of speech they never had before. And if any of you are on hashtags from Saudi, you can see what young people are saying. And not just young people, but young people all ages, but also young, in particular young people. The internet's give them the ability to cross gender segregation. A lot of young girls and boys have friends they talk to and chat with online. And obviously it's a tool for political dissent and organizing, which is famously illustrated by the 2 driving protests where the women drove. They put up the video on YouTube, and then they tweeted, "I drove," which gave people like me, journalists, a sort of more or less accurate account of how many people were participating. Now, religion, which is a very important issue. I found that there's a lot of ferment in this issue in Saudi Arabia. Young Saudis are very religious and observant, and they want the kingdom to remain committed to Islam, but they want things to be more voluntary. They want less state-enforced religion, and they want more respect for differences among Muslims. They're far less there's far less religiosity among young Saudis than among their parents, and they're more willing to question a fatwa. They're more open to discussion, usually online, about religion, and people have been noting that there's even discussion online about atheism, which was a taboo subject in Saudi Arabia for many people. I would go as far as saying that there's a brewing crisis of religious authority that's not yet fully matured, but it's going there, among young people because they've lost faith in state-employed clerics. Why? Well, they say they're always negative, they're stressing what's forbidden, they focus on trivial matters, and they fail to address the problems of youth and other moral problems of modern life. I met a young group of Saudis who are actually looking for new ways on their own to interpret Islam. And they've been meeting regularly for 3 years. They have annual conferences. And the last one, none of them are in Saudi. One was in Dubai and one was in Kuwait. I forget where the other one was. But anyways, these changing religious attitudes pose a threat to the clerical establishment, and that's one reason why some clerics have been so vocal criticizing the overseas scholarship program, because they know it's going to accomplish what King Abdullah intended when he created it, which was to expose young Saudis to more ideas and more cultures around the world. Okay, political attitudes. I think the biggest impact in Saudi Arabia of the Arab awakening was its impact on people's minds and in raising political awareness. Obviously, this is across the board, not just young people, but it is among young people too. One 19-year-old woman said with some satisfaction that the revolutions elsewhere had made the royal family afraid of revolution in the kingdom, and as a result, she added, they're giving us more freedoms. I think she meant mainly the freedom on Twitter and Facebook. Some interviewees cited another effect of the Arab awakening as a greater willingness by people to demand what they view as their rights. There's more courage from the youth to just demand things, whether it's a right, a privilege, or a dream, said one medical student to me in Jeddah. Most youths I spoke to said they admired the protesters in Tunis and Yemen and Egypt, but they don't want to imitate them by having street protests in Riyadh. I found young Saudis to be evolutionary, not revolutionary. They want change, but they want it to come gradually, step by step, so that it won't jeopardize their safety and their security. They also are not for tearing down the House of Saud. Across the board, among Shiites and Sunnis, there's great love for King Abdullah. Now, this love does not extend to the rest of the royal family, which is viewed as very corrupt by many Saudis. However, young Saudis still have a very utilitarian view of the royal family, and by that I mean they don't want to see a future without the royal family right now, because they attribute the royal family as the ones that keep the country together and keep tribal rivalries and regional rivalries from rising to the surface. Even among those Saudis, young Saudis who favored political reforms, there's a great deal of ambivalence towards elections. This surprised me, but they, time and again in my interviews, they would say, well, we're not so sure about elections. You know, we're afraid that it'll bring up tribal rivalries and civil strife. And so the bottom line is there's not a groundswell for an elected parliament. When I asked them what they thought the biggest danger was to their future, many of them raised the possibility of factional infighting within the royal family as a result of the succession. Nobody thinks that's going to happen after Abdullah dies, because it seems that Salman is a shoo-in, but after him, you know, maybe things will become a little less clear. So Saudi youth are really different from Arab youths elsewhere, partly because they have more to lose economically and financially and security-wise, but also because they come from a more conservative society. So my analysis of the political orientation of young Saudis is this, that there's quite a few of them, maybe more than 50%, who really are not interested in politics. They want things to stay the same. They don't want elections. They just want everything to stay the same. However, there is a very significant minority that's politically conscious and wants more transparent government, that, you know, is angered by the fact that, oh, the House of Saud thinks they own us. And they do usually speak in terms of what they'd like. They'd like a constitutional monarchy. That's what they say. So bottom line, as far as I can see right now, and that's an important phrase, right now, is that despite the yearnings for political reform, there does not appear to be a critical mass of youth demanding the type of reforms that threaten Al Saud rule. For the moment, and probably for a few more years, the Saudi government does not face a generation of angry, rebellious 20-somethings. Okay, going back to my emphasis on right now, do I think things are going to stay that way? No. I think, given the current trends among Saudi youth, we're going to see Saudi young people increasingly better educated, more globally connected, more politically conscious, and more demanding of personal and social freedoms. The overseas students will be coming back in droves and with new ideas. I personally think their biggest impact initially is going to be on the economy and on the educational system, and only later they might have a political impact. The internet mind expansion is going to continue, so all signs point to a greater restlessness and independence among Saudi youth. I also think that the politically aware segment of Saudi youth that I spoke of will expand. It will grow, and it will demand more participatory and more transparent government. Now, they won't call this democracy, but they will want reforms that give them more control, one ideally in which they share power with the monarchy. I do see in the future a more polarized Saudi society in general, because more and more young Saudis, as they question long-held assumptions, multiple strands of thoughts on different topics are developing. And already it's possible to see two Saudi Arabias. One is progressive, outgoing, at ease with global interactions. The other is inward-looking, extremely religious-oriented, and very conservative. And these conservatives view outside Western influences as responsible, say, for wanting to let women drive. And they oppose women driving because they say their society will look more like America's. This conservative strand might give rise to a very militant conservative movement in the future as Saudi does become more diverse. So I really think that a new template is needed from Saudi society and Saudi government for how they treat young people. Young people in Saudi Arabia up to now, and it's changing already, have been treated as a passive vessel into which we pour our culture, and they're supposed to replicate us. Well, young Saudis increasingly are rejecting that template. They want to say in what gets poured into them. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Chloe Mulderig. She's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Anthropology here at Boston University. She's been working in Morocco for over a decade and conducted dissertation research throughout 2011 and 12 in Morocco and was able to observe the Arab Spring from within the region. Her upcoming dissertation explores the creation of religious identity and hypocrisy among young women in Fez. Her current research focuses on issues of youth identity, religious experience, and political authority in both Morocco and the greater Islamic world.
Good morning. I'm so humbled to be here with so many prestigious and well-placed members of the public looking at the Arab Spring, not just academics, but activists, journalists, etc. I want to thank those founders of this conference, in particular Dr. Norton, for his continuing support, for the Pardee Center here in Boston University, as well for their continuing support of my research. I was in Morocco at the beginning of 2011. I've been working in Morocco for a very long time. And as we sat watching first Ben Ali fall and then Mubarak, I started listening to many of the young men and women around me. And the discourse was often the same. We don't want to have a revolution but the becauses were often different. Because we don't want to disrupt the tourist industry. Because we don't want Europeans to be afraid to come visit, because we're afraid of Islamophobia and we think this will increase it, because our king has been making some progress and we hope he'll continue to make more. So I began looking at why the Arab Spring was resonating with these young people differently than the way that I was hearing it discussed in Western media in particular. And many of the issues that have been discussed today, of course, are incredibly relevant for the Arab Spring, the Arab Awakening, whatever we want to call the events since 2011. Ideas about the lack of democracy, the lack of political freedom, the failure of leadership on a number of levels, the obvious, blatant, and at times mocking corruption of leadership at all levels of government, and perhaps more importantly, a lack of dignity. First, a recognition of poor structural conditions, but more importantly, a lack of respect from police and the military, which we can translate lack of respect to direct abuse, to be honest, as well as a lack of freedom of press, freedom of religion. But in many ways, what I heard from young people was that their frustration was about a lack of opportunity. And so what I want to talk about today is the inability to attain adulthood. I want to sort of place our ideas about these political changes or these economic problems that the Middle East is facing, actually try to put these into a context of how young people experience them, what it means to them at this time. So in many ways, I feel that young people are really struggling to reach adulthood. And there are a couple of avenues along which this seems to be pretty obvious. First and foremost, when we think about becoming an adult, we think of that most basic societal contract. Children will grow up one day, they're going to be able to contribute productively to society, And then they're going to raise families of their own, have their own children, hopefully provide better opportunities for those children that they had. For this current generation of youth, and as many of my colleagues have discussed, there is a huge youth bulge in the Middle East, huge populations in every major Arab country of young people under the age of 25. For this generation, this promise has been broken. They do not have the access to educational success. They do not have the access to job security. And more importantly, they don't have the access to marriage that they used to. So to begin with, obviously, we have talked about some of the economic problems, and in particular, youth unemployment in the Arab world. And I think it's important when we look at statistics about youth unemployment to recognize that, one, about half of Arab youth are not even engaging the job market. And this is for a variety of reasons, and it differs from state to state. I don't begin to presume that every Arab state is the same. I work in Morocco. We have had a very different experience of the Arab Spring. But for the most part, young people are choosing not to engage in the workforce. Those that do are more interested in public sector jobs because of cronyism. And the United Nations Development Program, the League of Arab States, said in 2010 that in the next decade, and let's remember, we're almost halfway there, the Arab world needed to produce about 51 million jobs. And that's not even if we start considering getting more and more women into the workforce. That's only going to exacerbate the stress on states to create new jobs. Many states are not interested in doing this. They want to maintain those patrimonial networks. So the idea of creating new positions to put new workers into doesn't appeal to many states. What does unemployment mean? Well, in developed economies, we have about 6% on average total unemployment, 14% youth unemployment. In the Middle East, we have about 11% unemployment, but 26% youth unemployment. And that figure, in my opinion, is incredibly low because, again, it doesn't include those who are choosing not to enter the workforce, in many cases out of frustration. I would agree absolutely with Dr. Kamet that food subsidies put a great financial strain on states, but I also believe that the recession on a global level put a lot of stress on a number of Middle Eastern states because, one, of the decrease of tourism, and for many in the middle and lower classes, tourism is a major source of income, foreign tourism, particularly where I work in North Africa, from Europe. And in addition, foreign remittances, which make up a major part of the economies, especially for middle and lower class in many Arab states. These remittances dried up in many cases because of global economic problems. So unemployment here is not just a problem. Unemployment in the Middle East is a problem, and it all pulls down to we don't have money. We don't have jobs. Our government promised us we'd have these things, and it's a generation later, and where is any of the promises that came out of the 80s? Where is our generation's opportunities? To make it worse, the international community has greatly applauded the Arab world for the amount of money that has been thrown into educational programs. In many cases, this money is misallocated. Let's move beyond the obvious corruption. Students learn rote memorization. Students focus on skills that they don't feel are important on the job market. These skills are important for getting public sector jobs, most of which are going to be gotten based on nepotism, not on actual skill. And the skills emphasis is not for the types of skills necessary for private sector jobs, computer literacy, things like that. In many parts of the Arab world, you are actually less likely to get a job the more time you spend in school. In Morocco, you are most likely to get a job if you don't finish high school. If you finish college, you are greatly harming your chances. So we have almost 70% unemployment among people who have secondary school, masters, PhDs, etc. So it's actually better to not go to school right now. So for young people in the Arab world, and they can use the internet just like the rest of us, they can see in the West how we talk about education as the silver bullet. It is one hell of a bitter pill to swallow when you spend time in education only to find out that it actually has made you less likely to get a job. The number of young people that I talk to in Morocco that go down to the capital, Rabat, with diplomas in hand and stand in front of the parliament building day after day and yell, "Where are our jobs that you promised us?" These are well-educated, but they aren't. They're over-educated, and the opportunities simply aren't there. In addition, the Arab world and the Muslim world in the larger context has been going through a lot of changes in family structure, new ideas about imagined autonomy, living alone or living in more nuclear families, delay of marriage, things like this, sexual frustrations at the delay of marriage. These have all been building because of changes in family structure and, I would argue, because of a delay in marriage. Now, why is the Arab world experiencing such a delay in marriage? There are many reasons. The main one, I would argue, is that bride prices have skyrocketed as more and more families allow their children to marry for love as opposed to marry for social bonds or to marry to increase ties between families. And so in encouraging social change in ideas of love and marriage, marriage has become incredibly expensive. So for example, where I work in Morocco, a young man may have to pay 5,000 euros in bride price. He makes 5 euros a week. That's quite a price for love. And for those who are trying to be good and pious Muslims, who want to wait until marriage to engage in sexual intercourse, who want to wait until marriage to build families, that delay is aggravating, heartbreaking, frustrating. And the result, as Diane Singerman puts it, it is only through marriage that adolescents gain adult status due to social, cultural, and religious norms. Yet young people marry at a later age in the Middle East, 31 years for men, 23 for women, than anywhere else in the globe except for China. And early marriage among young women has fallen more dramatically than anywhere else in the globe. So the result is that we have young people who are looking to become adults. Well, education didn't do it, and a job didn't do it, and marriage is not going to do it. You can't go on the Hajj and be a pious Muslim if you can't afford to go on the Hajj. You can't raise a family if you can't be married. You can't be seen as an active member in your community, an active member in your mosque, if you're not engaged in the community. And what's one of the major markers of that? Having a family, raising a family, being part of that. So where can meaning be found? I would increasingly argue that part of the reason so many young people are engaged in the demonstrations and revolutions of the Arab Spring is because they are looking for a way to prove themselves adults. They're looking for a way to find meaning and identity for themselves. In early 2011, many youth in Tahrir Square did not have to fear losing their jobs or homes by spending days demonstrating, because they didn't have jobs to be absent from, they didn't have spouses or homes to go back to. We are now almost three years later, and to be completely honest, very little has changed on this front. And in some cases, it has changed for the worse. The economy in Egypt has faced a lot of challenges. For many of those who worked in the tourist industry in Egypt has all but disappeared, unfortunately. So for many young people, they are 3 years later and 3 years older, and that's it. They haven't gotten married, they haven't gotten that job. It doesn't surprise me that for many young people, they are frustrated at elections when the elected leaders that they choose do nothing to actually deal with the economic and social problems that they're facing. And so when I look at the Arab Spring, I start to wonder how much resentment of the Arab Spring we will start to see in this generation. Not just resentment that causes the Arab Spring, but that resentment that is caused by it. Because as we see these young people looking to their governments and their new revolutionary governments to offer them something different, and the status quo simply perpetuates, and they spend another year unmarried, unemployed, unhopeful, we're going to see continued dispute, continued instability, and continued frustration. We can't overcome these challenges without actually looking at how they affect people, looking at how the politics actually affects people's personal lives. I think it's very interesting to hear my generation has failed. I wonder at some point when the young people of this generation will start to express that sentiment too. Because again, when will they get to be adults? It is hard to pass the scepter over to them to let a new generation take power when that new generation cannot situate itself in the very basics of adult life, having a family, having financial security. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker on this panel is Alnajjar. He's a professor of political science at Kuwait University. He was previously a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Middle East Center and also served as director for the Center for Strategic and Future Studies and the editor of Gulf Studies Series Journal. He's been a visiting scholar at several universities, including Harvard's Human Rights Program, Law School, and the Kennedy School of Government. Amongst his other publications is The Challenges Facing Kuwaiti Democracy that was published in Middle East Journal in spring 2000. Until recently, he was the UN Independent Expert for Human Rights in Somalia, a mandate that he served for 8 years representing the UN Secretary General. He headed and participated in a number of international fact-finding missions in several countries, including Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Egypt, and Somalia. He is a member of the board of the Arab Human Rights Fund based in Beirut, as well as being an international commissioner with the International Commission of Jurists in Geneva. His talk is Success and Failures of Youth and Women Movements in the Gulf.
What's the time now? What's the time?
It is 12:15.
Okay, that's just to say good afternoon, just to make sure that I am not stepping the time. Yeah, thank you, Professor Norton, Professor Faris, for the invitation and holding this meeting in such a nice place. It's good to be back to Boston, and thank you. And my first arrival the day before last night, the gentleman at the passport control started talking to me, and the queue was building up, and it was just we were joking, and the most unusual place to joke about things, and he started talking about Kuwait, and he said, now we are, it's cold here. I said, no, I know Boston, which is, cold weather is not yet, so this is fine. So he said, no, but you have a lot of sand and salt in your country, and we need sand and salt here. So it might be a lucrative business to start something like this. That I never thought of. But anyway, that's, and then he said, oh, yeah, you mean your country is developing and getting on after the invasion, and now you have 85 McDonald's. I said, I never counted them. I don't eat McDonald's at all. So, but anyway, that was just a matter of perception. He gave me a lot of thoughts. The good thing also to have on the same panel, which I really didn't think that will happen at all, is Caryle Murphy. And Caryle, we had a long friendship back to Iraq invasion of Kuwait. She was in Kuwait during that time, and I took her around after the invasion. And at the time, Iraqis were targeting Westerners, so we had her on hijab. So we moved around, and she went and talked to some people demonstrating. That was the second day, possibly. People were not realizing that they were under occupation, so they went out. And so I said, Caryle, let's go. She said, why? Let me do my job. I said, no. There are a lot of intelligence people. And they said, how do you know? I said, I can spell them. So let's go. It was the first person who took my picture after I got out of prison from Iraq. So thank you very much. I think it's a good opportunity to thank you for that. So I was taken a prisoner at the end of, but then, I'm okay. So you can see. So the Professor El-Baz, I think you started on what I was going to say. The reason behind what's happening. What's happening in the world. I am an internationalist. I am not a localist person. So I look at the whole thing from international perspective. The name of what's happening is change. And change is not only in the Arab world. We used to call it the empty quarter of democracy, presuming that nothing will happen. On October 2010, just a few months before 25 January revolution in Egypt, Tahrir Square, I was in Al-Gala court place observing one of the trials there of an Egyptian blogger who was taken to court for too much details. The people who were there supporting him were all youth, so you could see. Maybe I will engage you a little bit, Amr. Something like this, you can recognize. Yeah, I was telling Dick about now we have an improvement of General with a thesis. He has a thesis he wrote about in 2006, democracy in the Middle East. So you can check it out. I gave a copy to Dick. So we have an improvement, and maybe you can understand that. I know. The issue of change with marginalized group. I mean, the two groups which are basically marginalized are youth and women. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Salzburg in a seminar where we had the title of the seminar, Getting Transition Right, a rights-based approach to diversity and inclusion. We discussed 4 countries: Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Tunisia. Maybe I can tell you the most promising of the 4 is Libya. Regardless of, despite of what's happening, despite of the bad situation there is, I saw a group of Libyan youth who are really putting their work into real practice. A lot of work is being done in Libya, which is a fertile land. The failure happened in Iraq, unfortunately, which I observed from the U.S. invasion to Iraq in 2003. I've been to Iraq hundreds of times, and I witnessed the development. I witnessed the failure. I witnessed the U.S. role, which helped into the failure. It's really injected failure, unfortunately, instead of helping the... So youth and women are totally marginalized, and over the last, I would say, 5, 6, 7 years, I've been doing a lot of work with youth groups all over the Gulf and the Arab world as well. Training, discussing, and you could see that something is coming. Their aspirations are not met. They felt that there is a failure. The tools, possibly social media. So if you can't do it on the real public space, you hashtag it. So you just go up there. Hashtags are with a very limited lifespan. They don't really live long. But then they create momentum. That will come through the change that is happening over international scale. There is a paradigm. We are now shifting, and mostly as political scientists, I have different hats, political scientist, and I have also human rights work. I dedicated my life over the last 30 years. And I can tell you, 30 years ago, we would talk to people, they just don't listen to us. What is human rights? Human rights is just waste of time. We have priorities. We have more strategic issues than human rights. Dignity is not really there. We have to have, as you mentioned, Arab unity. Let's have Arab unity, and then we will have everything. What happened is that marginalizing other groups is not really an issue. If you have ethnic, religious, whatever, They are all totally marginalized in the name of strategic importance, strategic goals. And what's happening around the globe is that now, at least, we see last September, this September, 26th of September, I went on my account to attend the first trial of a former president, Charles Taylor, in The Hague. It was like music. It was fantastic to have the first president on earth, former president, to be tried and indicted for 50 years, and he will serve his prison sentence in the UK. Milosevic didn't make it because he died during the trial. So we have a total shift that is, despite what's happening, the international system as such failed us. It's not really going towards equality. It's not going towards having equal resources to everybody. So that international system is not really that helpful in this regard. Yet there is a different level of the international system. We have Human Rights Council, which now, up until now, we have the countries, the 192 countries, member of the United Nations. They have finished their first cycle, and now they are preparing for the second cycle, meaning that every country in the world, they have to produce their human rights records and be subjected to questioning. And I've all the Gulf countries, United States, for instance, the only stubborn country that has lately been trying to pull back is Israel. That's the only country. But okay, it completed its first cycle, but there are problems. This affected and gave youth, women in the region, language. They didn't have it before. They didn't have the language. They didn't have the terms. We are now talking about even the UN. The UN is a very conservative, it's a big elephant. It moves very slowly, and it has so much politics. It's a political machinery anyway, we can understand that. But even the most conservative organs of the UN, which is UNDP, now is moving. I had a lot of problems when I was dealing with Somalia with UNDP because they said, what is it? I mean, we had a program to reform police. And I had a component of that, we call it rule of law program. I had a component of human rights, training the police. So the person who was in charge there, he said, what does policing have to do with human rights? I mean, they need discipline. They just don't, what are you talking? Anyway, we got our way at the end. But at the moment, UNDP, they had at least 87 human rights officers in each office. And this is happening. It happens while politicians, whether it's the US or any Gulf country, are busy with real politics. The usual politics, who is winning what, the power structure and changing. There is a change of paradigm in terms of normative thinking. This is happening, and the youth themselves are bewildered. They don't have leadership. They need concept to talk about. The level of training, and I can see that even at the time when I was here back in '99, even the human rights program in the law school here in Harvard was not really developed. And now you can hardly have any university without a program on human rights, without people who are getting degrees, PhDs, and that adds up to the whole movement. And our youth in the region, or women as well. Women are less dynamic than youth. But then you have the social media, which is helpful in getting people in this direction. The regimes in the Gulf are really afraid of that. What happened, what they did is that they went on the offensive. Not only internally, because many of them you have, and the illusion is that when you bring all Gulf countries and try to deal with them as one unit, this is completely wrong. It's an illusion. It's not correct. But when you bring them together, they will go on the offensive. The offensive could reach as far as Libya and could go to Syria, could go to other places. They want to Egypt. They want to defend themselves by going too far, and that's very dangerous. Maybe at one point they will realize that it is very dangerous. Yet what I see is that the movement is going to continue. The harshest treatment from different Gulf countries were targeting youth. Basically, they are people who are in prison. They want to really to keep them out of the movement, but that's not going to happen, because then they renew themselves, they change, they have new tactics, they learn, and the field is full of new learning, and the new learning is happening, and also the dynamics of social media helpful. I don't see now we have most of Arab countries. Some of them are controlling the cyberspace. Some of them are completely owning the social media. So you have hundreds of paid staff who would just sit there, and they have different names, and then they have technology now. If you do it for security reasons, if you write a word, then it will be detected. So they have a software which detects anything that happens anywhere in the world. So if you write Hamzawi and he's going to be targeted, then immediately he will appear on the radar system, and then the whole structure will start attacking whoever is doing what. And Amr is a victim to that. I think so. I see that the development is going to be, it will never stop. It will change. And two reasons: the failure of the state, and there will be two major issues that will be very much close to the youth: unemployment and housing. Housing is very serious issue that they think and they take it seriously, and I don't see that governments, whether in the Gulf or in the Arab world, it's even worse, that they can provide that. So then the whole thing will evolve and continue. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. So I think everyone can stay seated. I hope those microphones are working. And just remind you that if you have a question, you need to have the microphone to speak into it. Do we have someone who can bring the microphone around?
I have a question, Madam Murphy. Do you think that this huge program of scholarship is really just the goodwill of the king, or there is more to it? In other words, the possibility that buying time by sending all these people out for another, 5 to 10 years, maybe, and then we'll see what happens. And this is a typically Arab attitude, in our dealings. And second, do you think that the ruling establishment is not aware that when they do that, at some point it's going to lash back at them and maybe destabilize the whole system?
Good questions. Obviously, I said that King Abdullah, one reason he started the program was to expose young Saudis to different cultures, make them more open-minded, because he realized, and I've heard real anecdotes about what the king has said in private, how he was astonished by 9/11 and the fact that these Saudis had participated and had been so radicalized. And he realized they had a problem internally in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so that is one reason. Another reason is we've got this unemployment problem. Let's keep the kids busy going overseas and studying. Third reason, the Saudi government is totally aware of the fact that they're facing a big economic problem in the future when oil revenue starts to dwindle. And it will, for many reasons. And they are, you can read it in their budget documents. We want to diversify our economy away from total dependence on oil. For that, we need people who can do jobs like accounting, like, teaching in a university, blah, blah, blah. So the third reason for the scholarship program was to get these kids trained. Now, did they think about the long-term political repercussions? I'm sure some of them did. And I think that those who did think about it think we can handle this. And, it's very interesting when I asked my interviewees, what do you think is going to be the impact of all these young people coming home who've lived abroad for 5, 6, 7 years and educated? And they, only about half of them thought that they would have an impact politically. The other half said, no, I don't think so. Our society is very conservative. And one guy noted that, in the 1980s was the previous height of Saudi students in the United States. And over in the 80s, about 10,000 of them came to the United States to study. They went back home and they fit right in. Nothing happened. They were not the spearhead or the vanguard of any significant political development in the kingdom. I must say, though, in their defense, they are among the most enlightened civil servants now, particularly in education. All the civil servants high up in the Ministry of Education who are putting into practice new ways of educating Saudis, most of them were educated in the United States.
Didn't that generation contribute to the restlessness that you feel?
You mean the people who studied here in the 80s?
The generation that you spoke about
previously.
them, and people say it didn't have any impact.
No, I know. It didn't have any impact in the sense that they didn't create a political movement. They didn't create pressure for political reform in any organized way. You couldn't say, oh, that's because this group studied, they all stayed in the States, and that's why we have this political reform. That didn't happen.
How about the general restlessness?
Well, the general restlessness is, for many reasons. Part of it is because of exposure to overseas, but, there's housing, as Ghanim said, I didn't mention it, but it's a huge, huge issue in Saudi Arabia.
Why isn't there? You have to have the microphone.
Okay. In Qatar and Dubai and the other Gulf countries, after 9/11, with the visa problems with the United States for youth, they started opening chances to study at those places in American universities that established the universities there. Why haven't they been doing the same thing in Saudi Arabia instead of sending the people overseas?
Well, I don't know why, but I think because the Saudis think we can handle this. We don't need foreigners to come in here and bring their universities here. Also, I can see that would create a big image problem for the government with their right wing. Their religious right wing. Why are we having, Harvard come here to open a campus? But instead, what the Saudis have done instead is, when 9/11 happened, they had 6 universities, and now they have 24. They're pouring money, billions of dollars into creating higher education opportunities for Saudis.
Within Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, over here.
I'm actually a physician from Tunisia, and I have two comments, actually, questions. So the first one is that I want to give a number. During the revolution of Tunisia, the average age of people that dying during the revolution was 27. Actually, the people who are leading the country, the average age is 75-ish. So there is actually 50 years of difference. And the question is, how to do the shift? It doesn't mean like people older should die during the revolution, but probably having more young people participating actively to the democratic transition. So, so how to do that? How to enforce that? And how to make it happen now? The second actually comment is about education. You mentioned that we have a high number of educated people, but that's only in quantity, and unfortunately not in quality. And this is, I think, what's the responsibility actually of international organization that forced in a way during the last decades Arab countries, Tunisia and other countries, to increase the numbers without fostering the quality, which led actually to people having higher education, but without the quality, so they will not take other jobs, like they don't want to do farming, they don't want to do agriculture, they want to work in the government, they want to have positions, why they don't have the qualification, actually.
I'll take the second question on education. I think that the biggest problem has been that for many international organizations that are encouraging Arab states to improve their educational standards, the focus is on percentages related to getting more people enrolled, getting lower dropout rates, getting more women in primary education, secondary education. And so there's an emphasis on those statistics. But there hasn't been a concomitant sort of focus on increasing test scores. I mean, on international math and science tests, the Arab world scores lower than anybody, period, lower than sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that there needs to be a shift in emphasis from the international community as a whole to going, look, it's not just getting kids in seats. That's not enough anymore. That it actually has to be, we have to look at test scores, we have to look at what kind of skills these people have, what they're actually learning in the classroom, and to make those the bars that have to be reached to get international funding, to get IMF support, et cetera, rather than having the goals be numbers of people in seats.
I can take the first half of the question about the generational disaster here. And I really think it's a matter of when your generation recognizes that it is not enough to tear out the building, but it is more important to rebuild it. So right now, your generation has succeeded in getting together and shifting things, and they have here some books that represent this, all of the books about the revolution in Egypt. This is by Abdurrahman Yusuf, the poet. Yeah, he's the son of the Sheikh in Qaradawi in Qatar, and he broke from the family completely, and he speaks very toughly against his father. So you can see that even a father and a son relationship has been affected by revolution because he broke out, and this is his diary of the revolution, one day at a time. And it's a marvelous book that tells you. And the second one is Wael Ghanim's, the Twitter revolutionary that did the whole thing. And the third is a collection of pictures that take the whole history of the revolution. But all of them, in writing, in discussion with them, and in their commentary, they felt accomplished for having made the revolution. That's not enough. Making the revolution easy, because it is a building that you tear down. Now it is important to say, okay, now we have to get together to rebuild that structure. And that's when your generation can take back the helm.
And there's a question back there.
Thank you all for the wonderful panel. My question is tied, well, it's for anyone on the panel that would like to answer it. It's tied to the recent upsurge in self-help discourses, and unofficial preachers. Amr Khalid, for example, has been very popular, as well as others that are pan-regional, even global in their influence. And I'm wondering if you can comment on any particular case that you know of and the influence they might have had on fomenting or on suppressing Arab awakening movements, and what you project might be the future for them.
Ghanim.
And I don't know. I don't think I claim that I understood the question. But if you can rephrase it, can you rephrase it?
What are the influences? So in recent history, in much of the Arab world, there has been an upsurge in self-help discourses and in preachers that are unofficial.
Okay.
Not through Al-Azhar, but like Amr Khalid, for example, that utilize mass media and popular culture, particularly for the youth. And I'm wondering if you can comment on, in any of your particular cases, on the role of such voices or leaders, discourses, preachers, on either fomenting or suppressing Arab Spring movements, Arab awakening movements, or what you might see as the future for these voices and for these people.
Okay. Well, there are plenty of cases and names that are dealing with this issue in both sides, but it's a matter of I think I see it as a healthy sign, because then you have the platform for everybody, and it will. One thing which we had a problem, the first problem that the so-called Arab Spring faced was the sectarian divide. The first problem we faced was Bahrain. So then it divided people on sectarian lines. Then came Syria. So this is a problem. I don't think that the discourse itself is happening not by control of anybody, but then you have names of around every issue trying to, for instance, in Kuwait there are a couple of preachers who are very much into calling and getting money to, and then they announce that this money is going to fighters to buy guns. It's not for humanitarian or for. I happen to I live just next door to the American embassy, which is supposedly safe enough. And I didn't know about his call. He called on Twitter. He said he asked people to come and organize and be in a rally in front of American embassy. But I saw the police cars are much more than the number of demonstrators. The demonstrators will not be more than 12 people. And then I went on Twitter, and I have good following, so I just throw the question. I said, I just passed through the American embassy. There were so many police cars, and what's going on? So they mentioned this person did this and called, and then somebody took a photocopy of his call, and then I saw the retweeting of his call was almost 400, but the attendance were only 12 people. Yes. So I did a tweet on that. I said, if those who retweeted attended, then he will be in better shape. You know, it's quite embarrassing. So there are a lot of voices that will go on and carry on, and you have in all countries, in all Gulf countries, the division, the level of oppression in each, they differ. I mean, they differ from one country to another. But the voices will continue, and there are, I hope that we can at least produce some voices of moderation rather than voices of extremism that they are pushing in this direction, and something like what Amr is doing, what Haytham is doing. You have to be objective. We need, and there is a value in it, and I can know that because when you take a position in Bahrain or take a position in Syria, or people will not forget that. There are people who are on each line going this, and they will remember people who took objective stand, and that's building up for the future. Because I'm not really worried about the immediate, aside from people being killed. I mean, the blood is running really high, and that's aside from that, the political discourse is going. And it's just a stage of a change that is happening in the future.
Okay, so I have three people, and then we're going to have to start going to answer.
Can I just respond really quickly to take Dr. Tobin's question in a completely and totally different direction? One of the things I find particularly interesting when looking at young people and especially women and the proliferation of self-help books or self-help media is that a great deal of this media focuses on topics like how to wait for marriage, how to wait to have children, how to get engaged and then stay engaged for several years since you won't be able to have the wedding anytime soon. So it's interesting to me as we look at this discourse of self-help, there is in part a dialogue about, well, the best way to help yourself is to be patient. And I think that for especially women who are looking at romance-oriented self-help books, this is feeding into that sort of sense of how long are we going to wait and what are we waiting for? So yeah, totally different.
Okay, I have three people here, over here, and up here. Those three, and then we'll have to break.
Okay, I would like to ask Professor El-Baz and Professor Alnajjar, how come?
She has the mic.
Yeah, it's on. It's on. Why exactly are you optimistic about the young generation now? Because as you mentioned, your generation was idealistic, optimistic. You thought you were doing the right thing, and this is what would be best for the future. And as you said, it failed. So why are you optimistic that this young generation can get it right?
Okay, it's basically, which was a very good question, really goes to the crux of the matter, which is my generation either depended on its own or was led to depend on institutions. But right, that's the new generation abhors institutions. And actually they think of the individual as the component of the society. The individual himself or herself is the one that they should respect and follow through with. In my generation, it was nobody emphasized the individual. As I mentioned, the case of the kid that worked in a factory. Yeah, so that the individual initiative, individual self-respect, and so on was suffocated. But right now, the younger generation is not going to take, and the self-help, self-recognition, the ability to speak their mind and so on is something that they value and they will keep, and that will change things drastically.
Okay, yesterday I went to the Kennedy Library, and just I was about to enter. I consider myself a student of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I know a lot about it, and when I saw the ads on the street, I went, and it's worthwhile. I really recommend anybody to go there. So when I was going to buy a ticket, the lady there asked, how many tickets? I said, one. She said, adults or senior? Senior citizen? I said, oh, I realized that I'm getting old without knowing it. So no, I said adult. So, well, adult works out better than senior citizen and becoming younger. So what is a youth? I mean, we are talking here about youth, but they will not be youth forever. So it's a changing paradigm. It's not something that is structured. There are some youth who are supposedly older than what should be considered as youth. I don't know whether I'm optimistic or not. I'm trying to be realistic, because change, we always put the understanding, the hypothesis that people will do what is in their interest. But what is interest? Again, there is a philosophy. It's a big philosophical question. How can we reach that? But I think that they are more pragmatic, more practical than the older generation who think mostly in abstract terms. I will end up in trying just to talk about the integration. I mean, you have a problem that will really create an issue for integration. We have always been led to believe that diversity is not good for a country. So if you have different religions, different ethnic groups, that will make the life governing the country very bad. I'll make the antithesis in Somalia. Somalia is completely homogeneous country. It's a homogeneous society. 100% Sunni. They came from the same ethnic background. They are even Sunni with the Shafi'i sect, all of them. And then you have, they speak the same language, yet you can see Somalia. So it's the division and the fighting is not necessarily happening in diverse societies. So the youth, once you put them in understanding and getting them together and then repeating the language, the standard, now there is a universal language of democracy, pluralism, human rights, independence of judiciary. People talk about this as something given. No one now will come and say that I am, even Sisi or anybody else will come and say that I am coming here to establish the rule of dictatorship. No one will say this at an age. So the language changed, and the language pushed people normatively to go and do something else. Maybe not in our life, but it will be in the future.
Unlike Amr, you don't need to fear being taped or reported back to, and you won't be arrested or interrogated when you go back to Kuwait. So I have a few questions, and please be very frank about them. Kuwait actually represents a very unique case in the Gulf, with the partial exception of Bahrain. In Kuwait, in the past 2 years, you've had tens of thousands of people gone to the streets, even clashed with police. Many notable figures have been put into jail, but the government couldn't keep them. Demand by the populace forced the government's hand to release them. Kuwaitis demonstrated and almost took over parliament. They encircled parliament for days, and the army and police had to interfere to prevent it. So there are calls within Kuwait, not just for reform, but even for constitutional monarchy, and some have gone far beyond that and asked for republican system. Why is Kuwait different than the other Gulf countries? How come it's gone so far? And what's your forecast? Is that movement there? Is there a possibility that it might really bring about some actual, real change in Kuwait? And will the Kuwaiti case affect other Gulf countries? Thank you.
The full answer will be in a forthcoming book that is coming. So it's called Kuwait Politics of Crisis. It's a paper edited book that we had a conference like I've been attending several conferences and meetings to understand what's happening, and that's very healthy. It helps to understand more and more. So we had a conference in University of Oslo, Norway. The title was "What's Next?" It will be coming in a book, and I have a paper on it. It's Kuwait Politics of Crisis. A lot of explanations I can give why Kuwait is different, and there is one point which is important, that the movement in Kuwait started before the Arab Spring, so we have it there going on. That's the nature of politics. It has a lot to do with history. It has a lot to do with the way of even if we want to go into relationship between the rulers and the ruled, supposedly, it's a different dynamics and different relationship that I can explain later. It needs a political anthropologist to understand, and then you can really make an analogy with what happens in Saudi, Bahrain, and Oman. They have a totally different system. Was the closest to Kuwait, UAE and Qatar. Unfortunately, UAE and Qatar went into the other direction rather than being more open. So it will continue like this. There is the high ceiling of demands went even of the removal of the ruling family, and that is there. That is on the table, but it's not really being taken on board by most people. People would like to have a constitution. The separation between the crown prince and the prime minister office allowed for grilling. Last week we had proposed the grilling for the prime minister by one MP. The fight went into, the emir himself went into public relation campaign, and he changed the electoral system where he was able to minimize the level of so-called opposition. We don't have a real opposition. That's the weakness of the movement. That's why it doesn't really go further than certain demands. And I think that's the level of freedom, as you know, you've been with us in Kuwait for quite time. And in Kuwait, I can say anything. I'm very critical inside Kuwait more than anywhere else, and nothing happened to me. Yes, in the last few, I think 2 years, there has been this backslide, especially on freedom of expression, and people who kept, mostly youth, who would go on Twitter and start attacking, and sometimes they go beyond acceptable norms by insulting people personally. But the government went too far in taking them to court, and some of them been imprisoned. And lately, when the head of state felt that he, won the election, supposedly, he just made an amnesty for everybody. So that's the type of Kuwaiti dynamics is different and will continue to be different. What will happen in the future if there is no agreement between everybody? I think we will, because there is a failure on the side of government. We have a complete failure. I mean, even the guy on the passport control here in Boston, when he said, "Oh, you have a very good government," I said, "Okay, I don't know about that, but let's pass it on." So I think it's different, and it will continue to be different.
Okay, we have one. If you can do it quick and the answer quick, because Richard is looking at his watch.
My question is on how we approach the fact, which was illustrated by the panel, that young people in the region, in the Arab world, are frustrated, are not satisfied, are searching for new ways and means. And how we can approach it with less of a deterministic understanding, because there are great spaces which really stand between frustration, lack of satisfaction, searching for an alternative, and a quest for democracy, and a quest for freedom. And so I believe we really have to deconstruct what we have been arguing for, to an extent in the last 3 years, about young Arabs demanding democracy, because at least there are 3 issues which have to be taken into consideration. One, the value of the narrative of democracy is contested. There are other models which are around. We should not undermine the fact that they do exist, and they are appealing. And they do appeal to young people. It's not that people are only moved when they hear the word democracy. As of now, human rights defenders and democracy activists in Egypt are described as traitors, at least in some circles. So it's not true. It's a highly contested issue. And unless we address sort of the supremacy of anti-democracy models, which, as far as I'm concerned, continues to exist, we are getting nowhere. It's a too deterministic approach. Secondly, democracy is yet to prove itself. It hasn't demonstrated real efficiency in delivering to people's needs. Third issue, and once again, even worldwide, and yes, Ghanim, there are normative changes, but there are other models which might be as appealing or even more appealing to some constituencies in Egypt or in Morocco or in Tunisia. China is a model. The upgrade of authoritarianism in Russia might be appealing to some constituencies as well. And how to differentiate between the quest for democracy and maybe the quest for governance and accountability and better service delivery. So I believe we really have to deconstruct it and take the issue of profiling, which was addressed, profiling young Arabs and how they approach reality, where and in what way, and sort of stop generalizing about the quest for democracy as a predetermined output. It's not.
I have one comment only on the democratic part. I don't really think that the Arab youth is searching for democracy. The Arab youth is in search of self-respect and a potential for a future. They really would want to say that, consider me as a human being. I am here. I have a right to breathe and move around this this land as an Egyptian, somebody who from this country, that I love it and I'm part of it, and consider me so. Give me some respect and some recognition. That's all. They don't really search for democracy now at all.
Yeah, I think, you know, in the issue of democracy, I've never seen democracy as a model that is clear in the mind of everybody. So you have your own understanding of democracy and mine and others, and that was put to a test when things started to change. And I gave examples of Bahrain, and I gave another example of Syria. Then you see those who were thinking of democracy started thinking that, okay, let's do without it. It's okay, we can kill the others. We can kill that was the first test, and that made me scared. My understanding is that it might take some time. Democracy, as we know, as in political science, we call it this the worst form of governance, if we discount all the other forms of governance. So it's democracy is slow. Democracy means a lot of things that are not necessarily getting people together. Maybe, and we, you know, you just have an example of United States just to understand what we are talking about. So this is not something to be exported. And that takes time. Takes time when people get self-respect. Self-respect is not only, and I don't know, Haytham or maybe you, Amr, mentioned the issue of whether it's election or more than that. I mean, just to think about election as something improvement of the situation in itself is not enough. I mean, you have to have the rights-based approach on everything. You have to have, I mean, there are two major issues: reform of the security apparatus and the court. These are the major two issues that are needed to be challenged, more than democracy in its broader sense. So if that is happening, and that's what we need to do. I mean, it's a challenge. I'm not saying that it's finished and democracy is clear and we are going to get democracy. Meaning that's the illusion, which in my writings I write against that. I say the illusions of democracy. There is a big illusion of democracy that people think that once we are getting into democracy in terms of constitution, then things will be better. That's not the case. I mean, just look at Belgium. Look at they had. I mean, okay.
Caryle, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to make a comment that unfortunately right now, all democracy, human rights, what people want, it's all on hold. Because if you don't have security, then you don't have anything. If you can't walk out your door or send your kids to school and make sure you'll all come back whole at the end of the day, then you're not going to think about democracy, human rights, a job, anything else but security. And as I said in the beginning of my talk, I've never seen the Middle East in more turmoil. And it's Iraq, Syria, Egypt, whatever. So
all we have in the Arab world is security.
Security of the regime.
Thank you very much.